Thank you all. I appreciate it. And welcome to the event. Excited to be here. So my name is Jeremy Wight, as you heard. I am the VP of Engineering at CareMessage, where I've been overseeing engineering for just about the past 2 years, and excited to share how we innovate in a very highly regulated environment at CareMessage. But first, why am I speaking with you? Share a little bit of my background. So I've been overseeing product and engineering organizations for roughly the past 15 years. This is actually my first foray into healthcare. So as you listen in to some of the strategies that I will share throughout the preceding slides, keep that in mind, especially if you are thinking about moving into a highly regulated environment. I will just want you to know it is possible if you're not from that background. My background is primarily B2B SaaS companies, so predominantly early stage and growth stage companies. So the past 2 companies I was at, I co-founded and oversaw product and engineering at a company called Base that was a software for executive assistants. So we did go through SOC 2, if you're familiar with that. That's a type of compliance and regulation. And then prior to that, I was in multiple roles at a company called InVision, which had a design application platform, so oversaw engineering there. Also, finally, I'll mention I've had the privilege of being with Plato since very early on when they first started. So shout out to anybody that was there when it was actually called Birdly. So I've been able to do a lot of mentoring, and I get a lot of value out of it. So grateful for that experience. So first, before I move on, how many people work in regulated environments in the audience? Okay, about half. The rest of you, if you work in tech, you also work in a regulated environment, and you just don't realize it. So while we'll be focusing specifically on really highly regulated environments, recognize that if you have any customers in California, for example, you have to follow CCPA if you have any kind of user information, and lots of other state-based regulations as well as federal ones. So hopefully this content will be applicable to you and be helpful for you as you continue to innovate in those places. So a little bit about CareMessage. So CareMessage is the largest patient engagement platform for underserved populations in the United States. So our customers are predominantly federally qualified health centers and free and charitable clinics, as well as safety net organizations. So if you were here just at this stage just before lunchtime, we had a speaker that was talking about telehealth and AI. And his space was kind of like a bigger audience working with employers. We actually work directly with federally qualified health centers, whom their patients tend to be the lowest served individuals in the United States. Oftentimes very below the poverty level, underinsured, uninsured, all of this. So work with a very diverse set of patients. We were just a little bit about our company so you can understand the size and scale. So we were launched in 2013. We are a YC-backed company. So it's been just about 10 years. We are a nonprofit tech org, which is a bit of an anomaly, but we operate very much like a product-led organization. We're about 50 people in total and about 20 in engineering. When I joined 2 years ago, we were 8, so we've doubled plus our product and engineering org over the past year and a half, excuse me. To help kind of ground in what we do, so we offer voice and SMS-based messaging services for our customers to engage with their patient populations. As I mentioned, we work with the lowest served people in the United States. And so when you think about this audience, probably very likely every person in this room has a smartphone in their hand or in their pocket. The patients that we serve very often do not. And so while the vast majority of people in the US might be able to be served and get their health information and be activated with that, the group of people that work with the type of customers that we do, very often, so 97% of people in the US have access to SMS, whereas only there's about 40% of people that actually don't have broadband internet access or a desktop or laptop computer at home. And so that really shapes how we deliver communication and messaging to our patients. So a little bit about a customer of ours to kind of help you understand what they're dealing with. So NC Medicist is North Carolina's only free pharmacy in the state. So beyond that, NC Medicist operates a mobile pharmacy. And so what they do is I got to visit with them. It was an amazing experience earlier this year. And they actually have a facility that goes out to the rural communities. They schedule this ahead of time. And people are able to, people, I think it's 200% below the federal poverty level, are able to get free medication. They can sign up ahead of time. And some of this is life-saving medication, whether it's diabetes or hypertension or different things that they're dealing with. And so the way that they were communicating with their patients prior to CareMessage was predominantly mail, very slow, or email. And it is crazy to think that mail would be the way that healthcare companies would communicate with their patients, but this is a real thing. And even with email, a lot of the patients weren't getting that. And you think about yourself who has a smartphone, you might check your email frequently, or maybe you have notifications off. But if you don't have a smartphone and you're out and about and something comes up, how are you going to get that information? So they are leveraging CareMessage to be able to send SMS messages to their patients to give them information, in particular when inclement weather occurs. So while North Carolina might not have tornadoes, they are affected occasionally by hurricanes, for sure thunderstorms. I'm from South Carolina, so just across the border, and there's enough of that where when they have those inclement weather events, they use CareMessage to be able to isolate that patient group who is planning to come to pick up this important medication and send them messages so that they can let them know, hey, we've changed locations, we're going to be 3 hours later, whatever that might be. So that's just an example. Another customer of ours is right here in San Francisco, the San Francisco Free Clinic. So you can, if you've walked around the streets, you can imagine the types of people that they're helping support for, and their mission is to give everyone care regardless of their circumstances. And so, we have a lot of facilities that are working with homeless people or people that don't have full-time shelter, and they might not even have access to a cell phone themselves. It might be shared amongst multiple people. So these are some of the challenges that are within the scope of our application. So more specifically about the regulations that we operate in. So if you're working in healthcare, you're probably familiar with something called HIPAA. This is actually a very old regulation. It goes back all the way to 1996, and that actually forms some of the challenges. So I want you to understand, what are the challenges of operating in this environment? So because it's so old, the interoperability and the requirements that they have, people are still kind of conforming to some of those old requirements. And it takes multiple years for new ones to come out. And once those come out, it might take multiple years for the different vendors, electronic medical record, EMRs, to make their changes and things like this. So it's very slow moving. Another one that we deal with is called TCPA. This is a FCC-based regulation around voice and SMS. It's about opt-in and opt-out and getting consent. Additional to that, we have state regulations. As I mentioned, CCPA, so you're dealing with typical user-based information and privacy policies. And that's, again, probably something that you all deal with. And then finally, we have the carrier deregulation, which oftentimes is more difficult to keep up with than the actual FCC, because they change so frequently and so often. You have to be on top of this. So what does all this mean? All of this ultimately equates to slower development pipelines because there's more things that you have to deal with. So the challenges that I faced at a base or at an InVision are far different than what I deal with and what our organization deals with at CareMessage due to this. So it adds complexity, technical burden, slowness. An additional thing is, if you're familiar with HIPAA, there's something called a BAA. It's a business associates agreement. So you have to have that with the entities that are going to process protected health information. So that also means that your vendors are more limited. The types of vendors that do that sort of thing are typically further along. They're not early stage SaaS companies because they're not going to deal with that. And they often require you to pay a fee, right, to be able to get this. So all of this means that there's less things that you can work with. This weekend, I was meeting with a head of engineering, a friend of mine. They're about a 50-person engineering org in a remote patient monitoring application space, and he said they release once a quarter. He's like, you have to put your auditor hat on and kind of grill the engineering team and the product team as to the things that they're doing. And so, you think about that and where you want to be, and that it makes it just more difficult to innovate. So that is all of the sorts of challenges that we face at CareMessage. So with all that, you might be saying, yay, I want to innovate in a regulated environment. Maybe not. It does very often feel like sledging through the mud. But what I want to challenge you with is that there are some strategies that can help you to move faster. And beyond that, it's really, really important that more of you in this room get into this space, into these spaces where regulations occur, because some of the world's biggest challenges exist in these places. Again, as I mentioned, healthcare facilities sending out mailers to people, like that's their mechanism of communication. It's still very common practice. Like, we need to move beyond that. And so I challenge you to move into this space with me. So a few strategies for success, some things that I've seen work well. So the first is put more R into your R&D process. So how many people have succumbed or seen product orgs succumb to the shiny object effect? Familiar with this? Yes, a few of us here, right? The shiny object effect says like, oh, cool new partner, cool new thing, marketing chase, or we got this one piece of feedback from this customer that is either really important or one that we really want to get, might have been off the cuff. How important is that thing? Doesn't matter. How quickly can you get it, right? This is very common, and honestly, if you're pre-market fit, a PMF company, if you don't have that yet, it might make sense to do some of these sorts of things. But I'll just tell you, if you're operating in a highly regulated environment, you're going to have fewer bets. Like I said, all of that complexity that I described earlier, which I really only touched the surface of, means that you're going to move a little bit slower and you're going to have more requirements to actually deliver on those things. So make sure that the bets that you're going to place are as well vetted as possible to increase your confidence that it's going to produce the value that you hope to. So push your product team first to really be going through the rigor of the research process in that R&D process, not just going idea development, right? So some of the things that's really worked well for us. So I'll say when I joined just about 2 years ago, things were not awesome. I don't want to say it was terrible, but we were not delivering very quickly, not very consistently. We were working at a very much a DRI engineer, like a directly responsible engineer, which is totally fine. We still operate in a similar way. But what I can say is that certain engineers were delivering and other ones were not. Some were thinking about compliances, others were not. So there were all these sorts of difficulties. So shortly after I joined, my amazing VP of product, Cecilia Corral, and myself looked at our process and we started implementing. We already had a pretty well-defined PRD process, which I'll talk about in a second, PRD being product requirements document. But we integrated that into a shape-up-ish process. So if you're familiar with shape-up, I say ish because we're not exactly shape-up, but it's close to it. This is something that was penned by Jason Friedman at Basecamp in, I think, 2016 or 2017. But it's essentially moving into 6-week development cycles with 2-week cooldowns versus either typical 2-week sprints or a Scrumban, Kanban, whatever it might be, so that they could make better bets longer term, while also having longer term projects that they could eject out of if things weren't going well, right? So let me kind of describe how we've done this and how that's helped us at CareMessage. So I've created this chart on either side of me. The top half is the research, and the second half is development. And so in let's say a very structured way, what we do is we have 3 phases to our PRD process. The first is the problem definition, which is owned by product. This is very common, right? But I'll say we have kind of a period of time where it's expected that they're really doing the research, understanding the product, and there's actually a multi-person review that takes place in that PRD before it gets pushed to the phase 2, which is where it's generally taken over by a designer, a product designer, where they're actually defining the solution, right? When this is really neatly packaged, and it's not always this way, but generally this process takes place during that dev cycle, right? So during that 6 weeks, They might have already an idea. There's already things that they're thinking about, one, or it might be a multi-phase project, a PRD that was looked at that was way too massive. And so in that process, we had to cut scope. And so now they're saying, okay, it's really important. We want to make another bet on that thing. So we're going to define this a little further. So the first phase is problem definition, and then the solution, and then it's being broken down by engineering. So at that point, during our cool down or around the end of the cycle, we figured out our resourcing and what we think we're going to work on, and they will break that down and make sure the engineers will be working with design and product to kind of refine that, give some technical trade-offs, establish some milestones, make sure that they think it will likely fit into that, and then we ultimately make our bets, right? And we decide what are we going to work on. What this does is a few things. One, it makes sure that the things that we're doing are pretty well understood. We have a high degree of confidence in that it's going to be valuable. The other thing is during this process, we have a compliance work group. So one of the things that I would say that I don't think we did super well early on was, even in my time there, was we kind of kept engineers and product a little outside of this process of understanding some of these compliance requirements. We had like compliance person, right? People that would deal with that. The problem is if they don't understand it, ultimately they're going to come up with solutions that don't fit, that don't meet all of those criteria. So we include product and engineering in weekly compliance syncs where we can they can ask questions, we can give them feedback, we can say, hey, this is something you need to think about. So that process takes place in here. So we have less things that ultimately get to the end and then get held up at shipping because, oh, you forgot opt-out, or oh, we forgot auditability on that. Some of these requirements that have to happen for us to be able to deliver. The final thing I'll mention here, and you can see there in that cool down, is the tech debt portion. And I'm going to talk about that here a little bit more in a second. But this is one of the ways that we've been able to handle tech debt really, really well. So put more R into your R&D process. The second strategy is focusing on the fundamentals. So I call it like going slow so you can go fast. If you're familiar with sports and American football, they call this blocking and tackling. These are kind of the fundamental building blocks of effectiveness in that sport. I would call this code coverage, testing, TDD, and tech debt management, right? It's like how you handle the important things. And I know it's cliche because this is important at every company, right? Well, I can tell you at InVision and even at Base, the company that I started, we did not do these things super well, right? Like we did not do them super well. But we do it really well here at Base. And honestly, I'll tell you, when I joined CareMessage, one of the things I told myself when I recognized we have 99% code coverage over all of our production repositories is, make us go faster, but don't screw it up. Honest thing I had to tell myself because I don't want to screw up that culture, that part of it, but I did need us to go faster. So it's difficult, again, if you don't have product market fit and you're kind of to some extent throwing things at the wall. But what I'll tell you is if you're able to establish good practices, and we do apply the 80-20 rule, so like we have different mix of the types of tests, whether unit tests or functional tests or end-to-end tests, right? Like apply the 80-20 rule, but having really good fundamental practices and going slower in the development phase ultimately is why we're able to exchange 6 to 7 million messages a month with engineering staff of 20, right? It's because we've done these things well. We don't have tons of alerts. We don't have tons of incidents. And when those things happen, we have a strategy for paying down tech debt. And again, that is how we use that cool down cycle that I showed previously in that process. Is each engineer, we kind of groom our tech debt backlogs 2 weeks prior to the end of a cycle. So then we prioritize that and we know here's the stuff that we plan to work on. We make sure it's of a high value, we understand it, and we kind of have engineers roughly assigned to that going into that 2-week cool down so that we know exactly what we're planning to accomplish. And I will say that there's lots of different strategies that have applied at different companies, but this one works really, really well for us. And I think it's one of the things that the Shape Up has done really, really well for us, given that there's certain engineers that are at my team that we've had this thing on our tech debt backlog for 2 years, right? And it's never been done. And now sometimes they get discouraged, and I encourage them with this, like, look at this, right? Like, all the stuff that you wanted to get done, we've already done that. Now it's like, how important is that thing? Well, it's not as important as we think it was, right? Like, that's a great place to be at where you're making those sorts of choices. You probably all have CI thresholds, but this was another thing that really helped us speed up, was when I joined, the CI process was slow enough that they were basically moving on to the next ticket. That's a terrible practice. Get them into flow. So I set a CI threshold of 20 minutes. If ever it takes more than 20 minutes, we focus on it, whether we need to put more resources or improve it. Right now, I think we're around 11 minutes for our deploy process, which is great because it keeps people, like, they don't move on to the next thing. They just let the thing go and then move on. Finally, I'll mention on this is the fix rotation. One of the things that I've seen kind of cause problems at other places is whenever you've got long-term projects or commitments that you're trying to work on, you get alerts, you have high priority bugs that come up. These things ultimately pull people off of the project that they're working on and ultimately can cause things to slip or people just to work crazy hours to get it done. We apply one engineer, which is about a tenth or so of our engineering development budget to a fixed rotation. And so during the dev cycle, one person is dealing with high priority bugs that are assigned by product or any alerts that come up after they've been triaged by the on-call engineer. The next thing I'll mention is accelerating innovation with hackathons. Probably everyone has done hackathons, so I won't go into this super deeply, but one thing that's really helped us is because we move a little slower, it actually means that our roadmap is pretty well defined. And so a lot of times we have 6 months, even 9 to 12 months, pretty well kind of penciled in as to what we want to do. In 2022, when I came in, I'm like, we really need to be looking at AI and how MLs can make an impact, but there really was no framework or structure for that. So fast forward to earlier this year, and we all know what's kind of transpired, and the access to tooling has become so much faster. And I'm like, we really need to do this right away, because otherwise we're going to get left behind. And so earlier this year, some things that helped set us up for success was I did an all hands with the whole company and kind of presented in a digestible way types of AI and how they can be used and the tools available, what they could, courses that were free, deep learning and things like this that they could consume and help them challenge them. And then we had the actual hackathon, a 3-day event, and the things that came out of that were so incredible and so well thought through that product, once they saw them, were like, these are close enough that we need to move these forward right away. And so ultimately, right now, so we did this hackathon at the end of June. We've actually already done multiple tests with different LLMs for our use case and found the one that's the most effective. And so we're already to the point where we're really ready to start beta testing with some pilot customers, which accelerated our timeline by 6 to 12 months. So a few things that helped us do that well was setting people up with success with the tooling ahead of time. We created a whole new GCP, we operate on GCP, a whole new cloud environment, a labs environment that was isolated from the rest, so it was easy to move through those. So there's a few things that can really help speed things up when you're operating in a slower environment. Last strategy I'll mention is breaking through barriers with partners. As I mentioned, EMRs move slow. Very slow. And this can be really, really frustrating. I've led integrations at other places. Early on at InVision, I was the engineering manager over our integrations team, built integrations with Slack, with Trello, with Confluence, like lots of these different things. It is very different operating with a typical SaaS company than it is with an EMR because there's not good interoperability. They often have closed API marketplaces that you can't get access to. So there's all kinds of difficulties there. They're slow, bad documentation. And so what I've learned from this is I made some early mistakes. The first is leverage your executives and your board to apply pressure if needed, right? We had this one that took us 9 months to get into, and we just could get no movement. So we got a board member involved who message their board member, and that actually got some traction, right? Because like, why is this board member that I care about, my peer, messaging me about you guys not responding, right? That's one way. The next example I'll share is this was just a few weeks ago. I will get people's cell phone numbers and call them. This is not something I like to do, and it's not something I've typically had to do, right? But I actually called a partnerships manager on a Friday afternoon, and he picked up and he said, hey, I'm at the airport heading out on vacation. What can I do for you? I said, well, we've been trying to get you guys to respond for 2 weeks, and we're completely blocked. He's like, okay, I'll let my team know. hours later, we get a response. So these are some of the things that you might need to do when you're operating in this kind of environment. The last thing I'll mention here is if you can get calendar, just consistent meetings on the calendar. We have one with one partner every 2 weeks, and I wish I could say it's always valuable. It's not, but doing that prevents us from having to wait 3 weeks to get on their calendar anytime we need to. So like just these sorts of things can help things move forward more quickly when you've got partners that really honestly don't care. Like that's the reality, unfortunately, the reality. So with all that, hopefully you haven't been deterred. My hope is that you don't get stuck in the mud and that you're willing to make this slog because, again, I think it's critically important for our world, for all of us to be wanting and going through this slog to innovate in some of these regulated environments to make the changes necessary for our future. So top 3 learnings, again, kind of put more R into your R&D process, focus on the fundamentals, and apply different types of pressure on reluctant partners. Hopefully these things can help you as well in your journey if you're operating in this type of environment. And with that, thanks for listening. Excited to answer your questions. Also, I'll be doing a roundtable tomorrow at 11 a.m. if you'd like to talk through this more in depth, if you have more questions. So with that, if you have questions, I'd love to answer.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of time for questions, so I'll be fast. I have a question personally. When you said, so it's a pre-market fit company, right?
We are not. We have market fit. Sorry.
You have market fit. Okay,
yes.
Great. And so when you say fewer bets, like how many? Is there like a recommendation or?
Oh, well, that's going to be highly dependent. So one of the nice things about this cycle, this 8-week cycle, 6 on, 2 off, is it actually gives you almost exactly 6 cycles per year, right? And so you kind of know how many cycles you're going to have. And we might have anywhere from kind of 3, based on our team size, 3 to 4 projects per cycle kind of going through.
All right, great. Jumping to CI. Does the 11-minute, I thought you said 20, threshold?
Yeah, so 20 minutes is the threshold. Right now, we're at about 11.
Oh, you're at about 11. Include build and deploy.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
That's a quick one. What tools or technologies have been most beneficial in streamlining compliance?
Yeah, well, so interestingly enough, there are a lot of tools that are custom made for this. Based on our size and what we want to invest in this, we do not have any custom tooling for this. So the things that have really worked for us is just, one, documentation. I think that's the biggest thing. We're a fully remote company, and we're pretty good at documentation. We have a very well fleshed out wiki, and so when our compliance team meets every week, we take all of those notes in a wiki article, so we have that historical context. So that's kind of the primary way. We also have some custom tools. So we've actually built like an admin tool that gives us auditability when anyone uses like the console, for example, which gives them access to potentially to PHI so that we can audit that and see what's happening, why did they request it. So there are a few tools that we've been built in-house to help us with some of these processes. We don't have something external.
Got it. Thank you so much. Next question is, how do you ensure the creative energy from hackathons is effectively integrated into your everyday engineering practice? This is a great question.
This is a great question. So I think the first thing is like the person said, it does infuse a lot of energy, and we saw that throughout the company, right? People, in particular, because we let salespeople do this and CSMs engage with this, it was like, wow, I can be a part of that creative process. And so I think the first thing I'll say is like, don't leave it hanging, right? We're all busy, we have the hackathon. Make sure you've got like already pre-planned what the next steps might be. And so what we did in that was we created a symposium 2 weeks later, because we did have other things we had to move on to, but 2 weeks later, we met together with the teams, the team lead on each of those teams, talked through the ethics, the compliance, the regulations, what they thought their next steps were, and we kind of like documented all of those, and that allowed us to have a quick framework for moving things forward. And from there, we ultimately, in AI, we recognize we all basically have the same concerns, and that's do we have the infrastructure that we can integrate with? Which ones will offer a BAA? Fortunately, GCP with Google Cloud will, as well as if you can use Azure will work with OpenGTP, ChatGPT, excuse me. So we kind of solved those challenges so that we'd be able to move forward.
Awesome. Yeah, the energy from hackathons, I feel like it can dissipate if you don't use it properly.
Yeah.
So it's very important to keep the momentum
And I
going.
think that's it, right? Just like have processes in place to not let it die, right? Like don't go, okay, cool, we did this cool stuff, and then leave people hanging not knowing. I think that's it. Like set realistic expectations for what is next. Communicate those things, right? Like, and that's what we wanted to empower the same teams to keep these things going, because we didn't want it to go, okay, now a product manager has it, and now we'll start all over with the PRD process. It was like, these are good enough. Let's like move this forward right away.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Irina. Thank you all. If you have other questions, happy to answer them later at the roundtable.
Remind us what time is your roundtable tomorrow?
11 a.m. tomorrow. I'll be having a roundtable up on the mezzanine, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.